Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, we're going to slow stitch a little sprig of lavender. We'll make it look realistic with just some simple stitches. For the stem, well, I use the stem stitch. And for the little lavender petals, I just use a straight stitch or a stab stitch where you just poke the fabric in one spot and then pull it down in the other. It makes an interesting result and it adds a lot of texture. I'll be using multiple colors of embroidery floss because it gives a beautiful variation, a little bit of highlight and a little bit of shading. So let's get started.
So to start with, I have just a little scrap of quilted fabric. You can use any fabric you like. I happen to like the quilted because it has a little bit of body, and I like the white design with the already printed quilting pattern on it. I have a Frixian pen from the office supply section, and this is just to make my sketch of my lavender. Then I have some gorgeous colors here. I'll include them in the information under the video, but it's a 311, 3746, a darker purple that is a 333. This one is a 554. I'm not sure I'm going to use this light purple, so I'll set it aside for now. I just thought it was beautiful. I have a green, this is from Iris. This is just a standard green. It happens to be the number 998. And then I have this DMC thread, 163. It's a green, it's got a little bit of blue in it. I like to have a little variation for my colors. I have the purples and a blue, a darker blue, because I think that's a beautiful color for the lavender petals. And then a couple of colors of green for the greenery. Now you can use more colors, less colors. It's up to you. You can incorporate pinks. You don't have to stay with purples and blues. Or you can just use purple. The more colors you use, the more intricate your design will look. So to start with, I just want to make a sketch. I'm just going to have 2 sprigs of lavender. And I really like the lavender because you can make them really tall. So I just start with long stems here. And I could vary the size of the stem. It's pretty much the same size right now. And then I just make straight lines just for the base of each of these lavenders. I think I'm going to make this one a little longer than this. So I might cut this stem down in size. Now from there I want to just work on the area that's going to be the top of my lavender, pretty much where my main color goes. And to make a little variation, I'm going to have my colors, my purples and blues, between here, and the same thing from here and here. So when I erase this with an iron at the end, this part will be removed. For lavender, just because it's so interesting, they have other little greenery. You can make double leaves, single leaf. It's just little interesting details to it. And this is how you make it your own and get a lot of variation. So I'm going to start with this bright green. That would be this iris color here, the 998. And so what I'm going to do is create a stem stitch from down here all the way up to approximately where my petals are going to start. Now a stem stitch is a nice stitch. You don't have to use the stem stitch. You can use other stitches. The reason I'm using it is because it makes a solid line. So I'm going to stitch just a little stitch, leave that loop, and come up in between my points of thread where it comes up and down. And then I just pull it snug. I'm using all 6 strands of embroidery floss. You can use as few as you like. Because this piece is pretty large, I feel like the 6 strands is appropriate, but you can always use fewer. The fewer strands, the more detail you'll get and the more delicate it will look. So I'm just continuing with this stem stitch, and I think it looks like a twisted rope when it's all done. So as you can see here, it's got a little variation. It's not a solid line. I'll come up here. And once I get to that point, kind of where I've decided that I'm going to have my petals start, I still want to create some greenery going up, but not as much. So I'll make just little stitches, just kind of little running stitches, and they're going to be very small. I'll put a couple together, and then a couple apart. And these will be the basis for my petals. So I have 2 close together, make a little bit more distance, just like that. And I'll start to make really smaller stitches until I get to the top of where I wanted my little petals to be, and I'll have extremely small stitches until I'm right at the top. And I don't even have to go perfectly to the top. I can stay just slightly below with just a little stitch. And now I'll do the same thing on this side. So I've made my stem from the stem stitch to the little running stitch on both of my little sprigs of lavender. Now I want to come over here and start to make these larger leaves. So now to make my stitch, I'm going to do a stem stitch, but I'm not going to follow the exact line here. I want the stitches to kind of fall at the top, just gracefully flop to the side. So I'm going to use the same stitch, the stem stitch. I make my loop, come up in between that loop, and now I'm just going to gently move my stitches away from the sketch. So just ever so slightly away. And as you can see, it's starting to form a little bit more of an angle. Just like that. I'll come over here and make another stitch, the same side, much shorter this time. But again, I'm going to still use that stem stitch. Maybe I'll just do 3 stitches or so. And I'll do the same thing on this side of that same stem. I'm going to raise the distance so it's not a perfect side by side for the leaves here. Just do 2 or 3 stitches. Again, making them fall out and over to the side just slightly. And then I'll start down here, and I'm going to return to the base, just creating those stem stitches. So I make the stitch, come up through it, and again, I'm just looking for that little arc. I'll do the same thing on this stem, but the area where the leaves cross, I'm not going to cross over them. I'm going to skip a little space in between and just have it stick out so it looks like it's behind the stem. Here's what I mean. I'll start here at the base. I don't want it to look too busy or too crowded, and that's why I leave that space. The eye will know that it's going behind the leaf, even though there's the space there, and it's not physically going behind the leaf. So I bring my stitch just before that leaf, and then I'll come up just beyond it. Just like that. It's very neat and organized, and it looks like it's behind this leaf. I'll stitch a few more leaves on this little stem, and then we'll start with our petals. So that's how it looks with the stems stitched, but not completely. And then over here is the back. Now I've left a lot of room here to add more leaves for both little stems, but particularly the one in the back. I wanted to use this color a little more than that major green. But we'll play with that after we get some of these petals done. I have my blue here, the 311, which is darker than the other two, a darker purple and a medium purple. I want to start with that darker purple, and this is the 333. Now, the reason I like to start with the medium color is because then I can play with the shadows with the darker blue and the lighter purple. So I want all of my little petals to arc up slightly, not completely parallel to my stem, but just up a little slightly. So I'm going to start here, right at the base of our stem, where we stopped with the stem stitch, and I'm just going to stitch a series of little straight stitches. I have one here. I'm going to move it up just a little bit, creating it just a different length, and then a few on the other side. And it's starting to come alive as lavender. So I have these beautiful colors. I'm going to skip a space just work on the right side of this stem here. And I'll just make a few of these little stitches. I've left space in between when we did the running stitch, but with lavender you want to have little clusters. And so I have that space. I'll come back up in the middle and I can bring one almost parallel to this we did here. And then I like to jump ahead. Now as I get to the top, I like to leave more room for the lighter colors. So I'll just maybe only stitch a few more stitches on this right side. And at the top, I want my stitches to be a little bit smaller. So I'll just do one more stitch over here, coming this way, and it's a little bit smaller than the others. So now I'm going to stitch down the left side of my stem, and I'll do the stitches on this little stem here with the same color. The stitches don't have to be parallel, they don't have to match up and be symmetrical, but I do want to make sure that I kind of stay within the realm of the overall size and the amount. I want there to be more clusters at the base of the stem than at the top, and I want to make sure that there's a little bit of lighter color at the top. So I'll continue this. So now I want to come in with my lighter color. This is my lighter purple. And I'm going to start right up top here because I know I want more light stitches up top here. I'll make just as many as I feel really fills that area. Maybe one more on the side here, off at a little bit of an angle. And then it fills in that area between the straight stitches that we made. So now I'm just playing around by filling in the space here, keeping all these stitches, little straight stitches, little clusters. I like how some are a little more crowded and others are a little more sparse. And with the more stitches that you add, you start to see the variation in color. I think that's quite beautiful. So I'm pretty pleased with the way this is coming out. I'll stitch on the left-hand side here, and then we'll start with our darkest color. So now these lavender are coming along quite nicely. I'm going to work with my darkest blue here, and I may decide to incorporate a little of this light purple as well. But first let me work on the dark blue. Because I want it to be a shadow, I'm going to really emphasize it being on the bottom of these little clusters of petals. It doesn't have to be the final stroke. It can be worked in, but I really want it to look like just a little shadow, a deeper petal. And it doesn't even have to go on each one. With lavender, there's a lot of variation just in the way it looks right on the plant. I can skip a few spots and just fill in the areas here. I think this is the part where it starts to really come alive and starts to be a little more realistic looking. Add another stitch here. So I like the way that came out. I want to add another stitch on this one just to tie in the dark color. And now I can work on stitching on this side. So I really like that contrast that we're getting with the three colors of the two purples and the blue, but I want to incorporate that lighter purple. I'm going to start up top here. Just make a few little stitches on each one. I think that additional color really starts to bring it together. The additional variation is just something that adds contrast and the eye really follows it along. I don't need to do it on every one, but just a few of these little stems. Right over here, I think I'll just combine a stitch right next to that dark blue. I'm going to skip over here and do the same thing on this side. And that's coming along very nicely. So now I just want to play with some shadows on the stems here. So I have my green, the 163, which is a very different color than the one here. And I really want to enhance these. I'm going to start on the lowest leaves here. And I'm going to do a stem stitch, really echoing the shape and going very close to the shape and the stitches we've already made. This will just thicken the stitches and make a little interest, a little variation in these leaves. Particularly at the base of the plant, I want these to look a little fuller. And then I'll come up on this side, and we already have room in between the stitch we did for the plant behind it, the little stem that goes behind it. And this is where you play. You might not find that you need this on your piece, depending on the size of the lavender sprig that you made and the stitches. You might not need this at all. So just use your judgment to see what you really like. I'm going to skip a little space, just make another little stem here and one on this side as well. And I can go up the lavender stem and just add small little leaves just in between those little sprigs of petals. If there happens to be a spot right here where there's a little space, this is the perfect spot to add a little bit of more greenery. So that looks great. I think I'll add one more tiny little leaf up top here. Just on either side, not too close to those petals. And that's coming out very nicely. I'll do the same thing on this side, filling in any spots and adding a lot more leaves at the base here because I didn't go with the brighter color leaves. So I've completed all my stitching. I have little leaves. I can add more if I wanted, but I'm quite pleased with the way that looks. This is what the back looks like. This is where I trim off any longer little knots that I have that I just want to clip down to size. And I have this beautiful couple of lavender stems. Now to remove that ink. So I have a hot iron, my little ironing mat, and now I'll just hold the iron over. I want to make sure I carefully get off all that ink. And I have these beautiful lavender stems. You can make a whole field of lavender if you wanted. You didn't have to go into so much detail with the stems. You can really just work on the little petals.
So that's my slow stitched lavender sprig. It's considered slow stitching because we don't use a pattern and we just kind of go intuitively. We stitch where we want, we fill it in with additional colors and additional stitches, and we just kind of let the piece create itself. It just takes some time, some patience, and some work. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thank you for joining me today.